Kimberly Underwood. Welcome to this episode of Disruptive by Design. I'm sitting down today with retired Major General Patrick Higby. Hi, sir. How are you today?
I'm great, Kimberly. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. It's my
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah. I met you at the Rocky Mountain Cyber Symposium conference. We got to ended up sitting next to each other in the front row, getting a bird's eye view of the speakers, and it's always such a great conference. Do you attend that often? That one?
I do. I have attended that pretty regularly, not just throughout my military or my senior military career, I'll say, as a colonel and flag officer, but then also after I retired, supporting some of the vendor partners that I have that I'm trying to get plugged into the right places in the Air Force to leverage their technology.
Right, sure. And I think I find that most interesting how people navigate, life 2.0 after such a great career in the Air Force. Can you kind of talk about what that journey's been like? I guess how did you get started and can you highlight some of the companies um you're helping or guiding?
Yeah, so coming off of a long Air Force career, and many ask me like, how long were you in the Air Force? And I half jokingly say, well, my whole life, because I was actually born in a Air Force hospital overseas, grew up going to Air Force schools overseas, and I didn't actually come to college to the U.S. till my freshman year of college. So at that point, I'm already 18 years old, but hadn't set foot in my home country yet. So I was sort of a Cold War military brat. But then and then I served in the Air Force, active duty for over 31 years. And so you're pretty much always told, what to wear, where to go, where you're going to live, where you're going to get stationed. And so for many people, it's sort of overwhelming then when the time comes to decide, okay, this very structured life is about to end, and what's next. And so I always remind people that, it's also a huge opportunity because it allows you to maybe pivot to something else. And so, many of us that are in the communications, IT, cyber business, obviously we see that we're very employable. After the Air Force, there's so many, not just around the DoD space, but in the commercial sector, there's so many companies that are hungry for veterans with our kind of background. So it's very easy, to slip into what I would call a traditional, like full-time kind of job with one of those companies. And a lot of people do that, and that's great for them. But I always try to remind people, hey, it's also an opportunity to do something totally different. So, like if you have a passion for working on RVs, I have a retired Air Force friend, and he is about to embark on a journey driving to Texas from Virginia with his wife and their little Nobo RV because he has a passion for working on RVs. And this guy's very knowledgeable about program management and information technology and cyber stuff. He's got all that, but he has a passion for something else. So what better time, to make a pivot than at one of these inflection points in your career. So I remind people, you don't automatically have to go work full time for a company that essentially has you doing what you were doing throughout your Air Force career, which you're very good at, and you're definitely, valuable in that regard, but you can also do something else. And so I sort of opted for the something else. I use this work-life balance. I call it 20-20-20. So I'll spend up to 20 hours a week consulting or gig stacking or whatever you want to call it, earning shekels, a little extra income. I do up to 20 hours a week pro bono. And again, that's things like I just talked about, just mentoring other officers or senior NCOs that are coming to the end of life 1.0, as you would call it, in their Air Force career, and trying to figure out what's next for them and their families and where to live and sort of what are their priorities and goals for life 2.0. And then I do 20 hours a week deliberately having fun. So I bake in, fun activities, hobbies that I had to defer that many of us, throughout our Air Force career, we end up getting very, very busy, especially once you hit the more senior ranks. You're dealing with a lot more, people issues and organizational issues and things like that that consume a whole lot of time, especially when you have the duty title commander, which I had many times. Anyone that served as a squadron commander or up to a wing or NAF commander or MAGCOM commander, they know there's just nonstop demand on your time. You're accountable for many things, many of which are beyond your direct control. So you end up just being consumed. And so any hobbies that you have, or even, doing date night with your spouse, a lot of times those things get, sacrificed at the altar of service. And in the Air Force, we do have a core value, service before self. So that makes sense. But then, when your Air Force career ends, that's a good opportunity to sort of restructure some of that as you come out of a very structured life, to say, hey, do I need that much structure in my life? And some people do. And then others like me, I'd like to have a little more flexibility around that, what we used to call work-life balance.
If I could ask about the fun part, that sounds awesome. What's in that bucket for you?
Yeah, so some of it is seasonal. So I had a significant injury to my leg, which meant that I wasn't able to ski anymore. And for example, when we were stationed in Utah, my kids were still young, and that's where they learned how to ski. And then now my son snowboards, so I enjoy doing that with my kids. They're now both my son just turned 20, my daughter's 22, so they're halfway out of the house. But after my injury, I couldn't do that for a long time. And so in the winter, when my son says, hey, do you want to go snowboarding with me? He'll snowboard, I'll ski. Now I can't keep up with them anymore. And I certainly, when they were little, I was gifted enough to be able to ski backwards and, like film them coming down yeah, I can't do that anymore. So my son, he rips through the terrain part, and I can barely keep up with him. In the fall, of course, hunting season starts. That was a bit of a challenge this last year. I think we talked about a little bit. I was bitten by a Lone Star tick back in May, so I contracted this alpha gal syndrome, which was a bit of a curveball because it meant I'm now allergic to eating mammals. So this last hunting season, for example, I didn't shoot any deer or pigs. I focused mostly on ducks, geese, pheasant, partridge, quail, things like that, because I like to ingest what I hunt. In the summer, I look forward to a summer vacation. So we're very deliberate about blocking like 2 weeks in July or August where we go as a family to a vacation. Again, we tried to do that during my Air Force career, and tried to block the calendar and be faithful to that. But inevitably, world events happen, and the military, we have to be there to respond to those world events. So many times those vacations would have to get deferred or canceled. Now there's nothing, we don't let anything challenge that summer vacation that we go on.
Right, nice. Oh, that sounds wonderful. And I come from a big skiing family, so I understand, the love for that, and love how you, work through that injury to come back to a sport that you love. That's amazing. I also understand, like, my son got to a point where he was like, "Dad, you're slowing me down," when we were on the hill. So, it's their
I
job at
can
the end
relate.
to
Yep.
pass you up. But yeah, it's a little humbling. Yeah, and I love that when you for the
20.
yeah, and I don't know if that's percent or just kind of a
That's
ratio.
hours per week.
Hours. Got it.
Up
Love that.
to 20
Yeah.
hours a week consulting, up to 20 hours a week pro bono, and then 20 hours a week deliberately having fun.
Right. I love that ratio. And I haven't heard of anybody who's kind of come up with that. That's so smart.
No, there's others. I was actually at the for flag officers that are separating from the military. They put us through a little 1 week program. It's similar to TAP, Transition Assistance Program. I think they call it like ETAP, so it's
Yeah.
Executive TAP. And we have some really great speakers that come through that, again, have done this journey before us to allay some of our fears. And I wish I could remember who it was, but there was one of them that sort of touched on that system of work-life balance where he sort of had a way of breaking down in those categories. And so that's sort of where that seed was planted for me.
Got it. Yeah. And I'd love to delve into that 20-hour part about the consulting. I guess how did you navigate that? And obviously you didn't go with just one company, you're involved with several. Can you talk about that
Right.
part?
Yeah, so what I my preference is to do be on retainers so that what I like to do is sort of find a company that's out there that has something that from my military, my Air Force background, I know would be useful to DoD or the Air Force. And then I ask, okay, are they making inroads? And if the answer is no, then I ask, okay, could I help? And then that's when we sort of have a discussion about what would that arrangement look like. And so many of my retainers might only be for 5 hours a month. For example, I was with a company, Secure G, and they had almost zero footprint in DoD, but their approach to PKI and hardware security and hardware provenance is more critical than ever as we again look at all the computer chips and microprocessors that are deployed in all of those systems that are out there across our, I'll just say Air Force, but it applies everywhere. Everything from the laptop I'm talking to you on to the F-35 that has tons and tons of chips. And we assume all those chips are, quote unquote, good to go. But in reality, we know a lot of them might have compromising features in them. And so SecureG has a way to basically bake in a PKI kind of certificate for the hardware as it comes out of a pre-approved fabrication facility. And then you can track it throughout its life to know, 10 years later that it's still good. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm a cyber and IT guy, so I'm really good about talking about like zero trust at layer 3, 4, 5 of the IP stack. But then who's paying attention to the hardware? And so I can have the most beautiful zero trust north, south, east, west solution out there. But if the chipset that's in the router that my traffic is going through is compromised, it's really hard to protect against that. And so that's where I partnered up with SecureG. It was a very small retainer, 5 hours a month. That's about 1 hour a week, right? Where I do a deliberate engagement with them. And it's usually, trying to get a door opened for them to talk to somebody that would have a need, or maybe direct them to, like where's a cyber opportunity, a small business research opportunity within DoD that could help with this. And so that's how a lot of these come up. But then other times I'll go with what I would call a more traditional arrangement. So, for example, I'm on the board of advisors for EverFox. That used to be known as ForcePoint Federal, and they have some really neat solutions primarily user activity monitoring, but then also cross-domain solutions. And cross-domain solutions, from my early days in the Air Force, my first duty station was at Fort Meade, Maryland in the early 90s. And at that time, NSA kept promising, oh yeah, we'll get a cross-domain solution. And a cross-domain solution in layman's terms allows you to commingle different security levels within one edge device or one communications channel. So for example, top secret, secret, and unclass. And so, at the war fighting, at the tactical edge, that's important because a lot of times you'll have operators that are sort of operating in the unclass environment, with radio calls and stuff like that, but they have to get feeds from very sensitive systems, overhead sensors, the F-35 flying over that picks up things that we don't want to reveal to our adversary. So you have to figure out how to get that to the person that can use it. And that's where cross-domain solutions become very critical and very important. And EverFox has come up with some, I mean, they have the traditional way of doing it, but they've come up with some other really cool things where they've recently acquired a UK company that's now doing that with basically an optical reader, where it's an optical read of like a document that can then be ingested. So there's no transfer of software, so to speak. And so that allows you to go, especially down is the challenge many cases when you're on a high system, going to the quote unquote dirty internet for things. And so there's all sorts of use cases there that I could do a deep dive in, but so that's a whole, so that's the what I would call traditional EverFox that is still very innovative and continues to challenge itself to be innovative. And then on the other end is like Secure G, that's a startup essentially, and trying to figure out how to bring their process and their technology and the way they think about hardware security into the DoD to make our warfighters and their systems more secure. And then in between that, you can look on my LinkedIn and you see I've got a whole bunch of other AppGate, is my favorite zero trust network access vendor. With them, I'm doing 20 hours a month. So they're one of my bigger, bigger partners. And again, when you think about 20 hours a month, okay, that's about an hour a day. So, I spend an hour a day, thinking about AppGate, engaging with AppGate, doing emails, reaching out to people, making phone calls. And then occasionally they'll ask me to attend a conference like Rocky Mountain Cyber Symposium, which I enjoy going to anyway. And, when I'm there, I, sort of work the crowd on their behalf. And I realize that, when people hear zero trust, there's so many different aspects of zero trust that I have to be very clear about, when I'm talking about AppGate zero trust, what piece of the zero trust umbrella am I talking about? And then does the person I'm talking to, that's usually a high-ranking individual in the Air Force, do they understand the nuances of what makes this type of zero trust different, or this way of employing it different, and how is this way of doing it more better for the U.S. Air Force? Another startup I'm with is Soltena, and they've again figured out a way to leverage an old long ago discovered phenomenon called plasmonics, plasmonic surface wave. And they figured out how to actually be able to communicate using plasmonic surface waves. So plasmonics were known long ago, but our physicist with Soltena, Igor, he has figured out a practical way to actually be able to communicate using that. And that opens up all sorts of opportunities when you talk about communicating command and control in challenging environments. And a challenging environment, for example, is underwater. A challenging environment is in a cave, underground, under a jungle canopy, in a parking garage, in a metal elevator, which is like a Faraday cage. And with plasmonics, you can actually penetrate through the metal. I say penetrate, it's really a transmission along the metal surface, and then it will propagate along other surfaces. And so in the underwater scenario, again, you can think of a team of divers that are swimming along, and the diver at the front wants to communicate with the divers behind him or her, and doesn't have a really good way of doing that. And with plasmonics, you can now do that even to the point of full motion video. So it's a really amazing capability that opens up all sorts of opportunities for doing command and control and doing sensing, even doing sensing in some very challenging environments, like sensing through a metal door what's on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's amazing that it not only provides comms, but also that sensing part. And as you said, it's has high speed, qualities and high bandwidth. And I guess, and I don't know anything about plasmonics, but
Yeah, so that's the the uniqueness of that is it's still, so I'll just use a regular, like we're talking right now about a Wi-Fi access point. So a Wi-Fi router, which traditionally, will have one or two RF antennas that operate at 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. And so it's like a dual band system. But then when we add a plasmonic antenna to that, and our plasmonic antenna, I'll just use my pinky as an example. It's something about that size. So it's not this gigantic thing that you're bolting on or plugging in. It's a little antenna that uses the same SMA or N-type connector on whatever radio or access point you're using. So I'll use SMA for a Wi-Fi access point. And then so you're still transmitting the regular RF signal that your regular, RF based device, edge device can pick up, like my cell phone. But then you're also transmitting it plasmonically. So you have an access point. Let's say I'm at an airfield. The access point is in a hangar. The hangar is metal. There's an aircraft parked in the hangar. There's a bunch of Connex boxes around the hangar. And then there's a maintainer out on the airfield next to another aircraft trying to, with a maintenance tablet, trying to access the Wi-Fi. And so when that maintainer is close to the hangar or inside the hangar, his tablet will pick up the RF signal, right, and communicate. But then as he steps further and further away, that signal tapers off and he starts to have delays or latency, or traffic isn't passing. But then once we add a plasmonic antenna, even though there's not a plasmonic receive antenna on his device, there's a marked improvement in how far away that maintainer can get from that access point to the aircraft out on the runway. We're still trying to characterize that in a way where we're not over-promising things, but it is a remarkable increase in distance. And then if you want to go even farther, we do have a plug-in, like in a USB port, for example, adding a antenna that you could plug into the tablet to also have a plasmonic receive antenna. And so what these plasmonic waves do, they come off the access point and they look for a surface to move along. So the access point is mounted in the ceiling or near the roof of the hangar. There's metal girders, right? And so the plasmons go down the metal girders, they hit the concrete floor inside the hangar, then they propagate along the floor from concrete out onto the asphalt pavement that's, on the airfield. They'll hit a Connex box, again, on the metal. They'll go around or through that Connex box. That's a surface. Keep going out along the pavement. And then they find the maintainer's leg. And they, I'll use the term crawl, but they propagate up, up his, because that leg is a surface, right? It's a boundary. The pants that the maintainer is wearing versus the air, that's a surface layer. So they propagate up that and then into the device, and it allows, a remarkable increase in range. And so that's a great use case for the Air Force, again, as we're trying to do more and more with digitized enhancement of our workforce. So, maintainers on the runway. And then you add the dynamic of, okay, some of our jets, they need a lot of download before they can launch a sortie. And a lot of that comes from satellite communications. But then we want to park the jets under a sunshade so they don't overheat. And we want to have solar panels and all that stuff. Well, now you've just interfered with that satellite signal. So what's another way to get the download that the jet needs to the jet in a timely manner without having to tow it out from underneath its shade? And so there's a use case of, okay, we can still get the download and go to a repeater that then sends it plasmonically into the jet so it can download its stuff without having to be moved. And then the maintainer that's next to the jet also has good communications on their maintenance tablet or whatever device that they're using. And again, I'm using examples, around Air Force, but again, Navy, underwater communications have always been a challenge, not just from the, like you think SEAL team divers underwater, but submarines, and now unmanned underwater vessels. And then you add to that the sensing ability of plasmonics. So again, you can have a plasmonic detector on the seabed that can now detect things a lot farther away than you normally could without emitting a sonar signal. Because once you emit a sonar signal, you're active, right? And then everyone knows, okay, there's an emitter there that is trying to find us if we're the bad guy. Whereas with plasmonics, you're probably not going to see it because, again, it's little plasmonic waves along surfaces, along the seabed, along the surface of the water, between the water and the air. And that's the other, the other neat thing. Again, think of two things underwater. I'll say two submarines that are communicating. If they do it through acoustic communications, it goes direct from one to the other. Or if they tried to do it RF, which quickly gets attenuated in seawater, they'd have to be really close together, but it would be direct. With plasmonics, the plasmons, or they go for the surface, right? So either the seabed or the surface of the water. They'll go up, they'll go across, and then they'll go back down
Wow.
at the speed of light. So you're
Wow.
not,
Yeah.
so it's not this, oh, it's a 5 minute delay. No, it's at the speed of light. This is happening. They sort of behave in a like a optical. Actually, they
Right.
are. It is a optical phenomenon. So.
Right. Very cool. Yeah, that's like we'll have to keep a watch on that and Sultana and that groundbreaking capability. It sounds amazing. And
And
sounds like
again, there's Sultana, they are definitely a startup. It's there's probably 12 of us that work for that company trying to figure out what's our 5 meter target. What is the thing we want to focus on? There's all sorts of application in the oil and gas industry. We were talking about, detecting uh, lithium ion battery malfunctions on EVs that are being shipped in cargo containers, in the maritime industry. So these big cargo ships that are moving, things with lithium ion batteries in them, some of which, most of them are very safe, but every once in a while one will cook off, and you want to be able to detect that before it happens. But if it's inside of a metal connex, a shipping container, it's really hard to get that RF signal from the car, I'll say, that's inside the container through the metal wall, to the bridge to let the captain know that he's got a problem in, shipping container number 12,357.
wow. Yeah, amazing. And I love how you've positioned yourself kind of to be able to usher this kind of innovation. Um, I guess, and is there anything hard about that, or how do you have to stay up on, technologies? Are you using, other hours to read up on things, or I guess how do you stay up to date with technologies?
Yeah, and that's a challenge, especially for an older guy like me. I used to consider myself very savvy on technology when I was young, because I had a pretty good understanding of how it all worked. And now I find myself playing catch up a lot of times on things, like around AI, for example. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I don't know enough to say, oh yeah, this is how I would employ AI, for example, to help Sultana or Appgate or whoever. So that is a challenge, is staying current with technology, because it is changing so fast. It's continuously accelerating. By the same token, there are sort of some enduring principles that apply that, if, for example, if you can find a technology that your adversary isn't aware of or isn't leveraging yet, it will give you a marked advantage. What we see in the Russia-Ukraine war, however, is there's adaptation on both sides. So no one is idle anymore, especially when you're getting shot at. You find out ways to overcome that technology advantage that your adversary has, and so you're constantly, you have to constantly innovate, and that, you see that like with drone warfare in the Ukraine, where the Ukrainians employ drones in some interesting new ways and with some interesting new payloads, and then the Russians figured that out, and they've now adapted, and now they're doing stuff, and then the Ukrainians figured that out, and they're doing stuff. And hopefully, very soon they can come to terms and agree that they don't need to be killing each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Just another question, kind of on the pro bono side. I saw on your LinkedIn that you're involved with NPLB Outdoors. Can you tell
Yes.
me who that is and kind of why you thought to get involved with them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of my hobbies, so the 20 hours a week deliberately have fun, hunting and fishing is a lot of fun for me. Again, those are both things that I used to do a lot more of when I was younger. But then as I became a senior leader in the military, my calendar, again, as I mentioned, sort of got crushed a little bit. So now I'm trying to get back into hunting and fishing some more. So the one of the first what I would call like veteran focused hunting organizations that I met up with was called Freedom Hunters. And I've done different events with Freedom Hunters, both as a sponsor and as a participant. And again, it's around camaraderie, hunting, shooting, fishing. So it's a lot, it brings a lot of joy, and I can see, a lot of our severely disabled veterans, they love coming out. They don't want to be, left at home just sitting around. They want to go out and do stuff. And then the second one I met up with was No Person Left Behind Outdoors. Again, focus on injured veterans, wounded warriors, and what can we do to get them, out. And it's not, again, for me, it's hunting and fishing, but NPLB does all sorts of things: airplane rides, hikes, trips to the beach, picking up shells, so the sky's the limit. Is it's outdoor activities, which covers a lot of things. And so again, I participated with them both as a participant, and then later on as a sponsor. So like having some NPLB selected veterans, wounded warriors come out to our shooting club in Prospect Hall, West Virginia, and shooting some clay birds with wounded veterans. The president of NPLB Outdoors, Adam, uh, great young American. I still call him young. He doesn't consider himself young anymore, but he lost an arm and a leg in Iraq, unfortunately. But he's very passionate about outdoors, and so seeing him, and so I have a lot of injuries and ailments. Like I have an injury to my right eye that impairs my vision, but I'm still right eye dominant. I had I got hit in the head a couple times. I have a titanium tibia, the list goes on and on. But then I see someone like Adam, who's lost an arm and a leg serving his country. He will pick up a shotgun one-handed and break claybirds, and claybirds, even for a healthy person, are hard to hit. And so seeing that, that's an inspiration to me. And so I think because it's an inspiration to me, I know it's going to be an inspiration to others as well, especially others that are struggling with similar injuries or impairments or PTSD or whatever it is. And so No Person Left Behind Outdoors, we're trying to inspire those wounded warriors, wounded veterans, and service members, that we don't want to forget about them. They made the ultimate sacrifice. They wrote a blank check to their country when they swore the oath of office. It's a blank check. Some of those checks were cashed in full, and unfortunately, they're no longer with us. And some of those checks were cashed at a significant price, and loss of limbs, loss of eyesight, PTSD, any number of injuries that were service related, combat related. And those are the guys that we want to make sure, guys and gals, that we want to make sure we take care of and inspire through a service organization. Again, it's a nonprofit organization, but I'm very excited to be part of the board. Again, that's part of my pro bono 20 hours a week that I do. We meet 4 times a year. We're talking about having a strategic offsite, to talk about goals. How are we doing? How are we using the donations that are coming in? What are some good events we can set up? Who are some partners corporate sponsors that we can, align with. So it's a very exciting pro bono opportunity because it also aligns with my, deliberately having fun in that Venn diagram. If all three of those overlap, that's really good. I get paid for doing something that's like a charity or nonprofit, and I also deliberately have fun doing it because it's around one of my hobbies. So that's goodness in that way. Some of the other, nonprofit I do, I think I touched on it earlier. I try to make myself available to mentor others that are separating from the military or about to retire. So again, I have time set aside to talk to people because I always encourage people as they come, and I'll use retirement and I'll use senior officers because that was my experience. So a colonel about to retire from the Air Force, and you ask them about, what's your family situation, what's your financial situation, are you carrying a lot of debt with you? And then depending on the answer to those questions, I can give them some counsel on, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And then I usually end with, and don't just talk to me, talk to, many others that have gone before you. We are here, to pay it forward because when I was at this stage ready to retire from the military after over 31 years, there was a number of, I'll call them mentors, that took the time to talk to me and to remind me of things like, hey, you can pivot to something else. You don't have to keep doing IT and cyber stuff. Hey, you don't need to keep doing full-time, 40, 50, 60-hour week kind of stuff. Hey, you don't need to, be in an office every day. And again, for, as you know, with the IT industry, we were sort of the early adopter of telework. And then during COVID, everybody discovered telework. And so a lot of people, enjoy telework. Other people want some, regular like camaraderie around the office water cooler. And then there's hybrid approaches to that. So that's just what I try to mentor people about is as you're coming out of the military. So that's part of my pro bono thing. Resettling Afghan families. So again, our pullout from Afghanistan was, in my assessment, did not go very well. And we left a lot of our Afghan partners and their families in a lurch. And when I say in a lurch, like their lives are at risk. And so we sort of owed it to them to get them out and then get them resettled. And so here in Winchester, through my church group, my church home group, that little home group of, maybe 5 families, and then maybe 5 other families that also came alongside us, we agreed, hey, we can resettle some Afghan families here in Winchester, Virginia. And so that, again, that's pro bono work. And that's, figuring out how to get them their green cards, how to get their children enrolled in schools, how to get them into English as a second language, English classes, how to find them jobs and employment to make them independent. And so that, again, that all takes time. And if you're busy with a 60-hour week job, you may not have time to allocate for that. Whereas now, once you're post-military career, you have more flexibility to do those kind of things if you design your life that way.
Well, that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your passion and your knowledge and your thoughtful innovation. It really is remarkable, sir. So thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to add or highlight?
I forgot to mention I am a AFCEA life member, so I got to put the plug in for AFCEA, right? And again, most of the events that I go to now and have gone to in the past were usually around AFCEA. And so AFCEA is, again, another great opportunity for coaching, mentoring, learning about technology, staying current on technology. So I know when I was in uniform and I would go to, Alamo Ace or Rocky Mountain AFCEA or a TechNet, vendors spend a lot of money and time to come to those things and set up, their booth to showcase their technology. And so that's a great, easy way to stay current on technology is just, go to an AFCEA event. I know now there's a travel ban again, just like there was, I think 2011 was the year of sequestration, right? And all travel got canceled. So we figured out, okay, what's a way where we can still do these things sort of through podcasts or webinars or whatever. But that interaction between, the commercial sector or industry, as AFCEA calls it, industry, military, government, that is an amazing interaction. And it's unique to the Western world. Again, that's part of the Western civilization values, is that interaction between government, academia, the commercial sector, and putting all that together. Vice having, the government in control of everything. That's not the society or the culture that we want to live in. And so to me, AFCEA is one of those pillars of Western civilization, I'll say.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts and your experiences. And thanks so much for taking the time today, sir. I really appreciate it.
Yep. And enjoy the rest of your time in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.